Okay. So in the last class, we learned some of the built-in string functions and date functions. So we will be continuing the datetime functions today. And from those datetime functions, we'll learn date part, date add, and date diff or date difference functions in SQL Server, and practical example of using these functions. Okay. Okay. So to start with, let's start with the date part. So date part function, as it says, it returns the certain part of the date. So it usually returns an integer representing the specified date part. For example, if it's the month part, it will return an integer from 1 to 12. And if it's a day, it returns an integer from 1 to 31, and so on. So this function is similar to date name function. But in date name function, it returns an n-varchar, whereas date part returns an integer. Like if you remember, when we used the date name function, it was returning, for example, for the weekday, it was returning the names of the days in a week, like Monday, Tuesday, and so on. And those are returned as an n-varchar data type. But date part function, it returns integer, depending on what part of the date you are selecting. So these are the date parts that you can return. You can see here, you can return the year, quarter, month, day of year, day, week, weekday, and so on. And this is the abbreviation for this. Let's try several examples. Let's see. We have in this table we have the date of birth column, and now let's let's start by the year, and then go month, and then day, and so on. Okay. So to do that, as usual, if you remember, there is a general syntax for all the functions. So you can select date part, and then open close parentheses, just like any other function. And within the function, the parentheses, you will specify what part of the date you want to return. Let's try returning the year part of, and then you give the column name or whichever specific, if you have a specific date, you can also provide that. But in this case, we are trying to get the year part of this date of birth column. So we will provide the name of the column, which is DOB. And then we'll say, obviously, from this table, because it has to know where this column comes from. And now if I execute that, we will see the year part of the date. If we can also select the name and then the date part, so that we can see who was born in what year. So A was born in 1988, B was born in 1925, and so on. Okay? So this returns the year part of the date. And similarly, we can return like month, for example, say month, and then if I put this here, and then so instead of saying year, if I say month, now it will return the month, which is it will return it as an integer, which is 3, which means March. Okay. You can also, you see, we're typing year and month, right? You can also use this one of these abbreviations. For example, for year, you could use YY, or for month, you could use MM, and it should work fine. For example, in this case, instead of saying month, I could say mm, and let's see if it works. And it works. You see?
Yeah.
Instead of saying month, we'll say or instead of saying year, I can say I can provide the abbreviation for year, which is double Y. And this here you can also choose the format. You can either say YY or you can say 4Ys. It doesn't matter. So basically, this will return the same result. Okay.
Yeah.
So I can say 2Ys or I can say 4Ys. If you see that IntelliSense of the Management Studio will already suggest what to use. IntelliSense, by the way, means, for example, the suggestion by the Management Studio. For example, if I type Y, you see it's already suggesting these values for me, right? And I can choose from any of this, or I can type. So this function, this feature of the Management Studio is called IntelliSense. Okay.
IntelliSense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can say year, I can say Y, or YY, or 4Ys. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Okay. Similarly, I can do the same for any of these parts of the date. Let's say I can do day day of year, for example. In this case, dy or day of year. So if I paste this, and then if I say day of year, and then hit this gives you the day as in starting from January 1, it starts counting, and so it's the this is the 79th day of the year. For example, instead of this, if we do, like, say, if we want to calculate what day of the year is today, I can say instead of date of birth, I will say get date.
Okay.
If you remember, get date means today. So basically, get date, you can translate it as today or right now. Okay? And if I do that, this means so today is the 176th day of the year. So there's like 365 days in a year, and we are in half of the year now. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is what date part does. And like, for example, you see in this slide, it says the difference between the date name and then date part. So date name actually returns the actual name for the date, and date part returns an integer. See? Let's try that as an example. So I'll put it as date name versus date part. Okay. And this is the date part, and let's say if I do week, just like in this case, weekday, and then if I do the same thing with not date part but date name, you will see the difference. You see, one is returning Thursday, the other is returning 3. Okay, and if you look at this, so Thursday is like, if you count from starting from Tuesday, if you start counting from Monday, it's actually the second day of the week, right? Monday is the first, Tuesday is the second. But in SQL Server, it actually starts the week from Sunday. Okay? So that's why it returns 3. Sunday is the first day of the week. Monday is the second day of the week. And then
SQL starts with Sunday?
Yes. That is, I think that starting the week from Sunday is like international standard, something like that. So you can, I guess in your phone calendar, if you see, like, if you have let's say,
yeah, yeah,
here in the calendar, it also starts from Sunday.
yeah.
But I think you can change this feature, but by default, it starts from Sunday. See?
Yeah, yeah.
Week starts on Sunday and then goes Monday, Tuesday. So it becomes the third day of the week. Okay? So this is the difference between the date part and then date name. So date name returns an varchar value, which is Tuesday here as a string, and date part returns an integer. Okay,
Yeah.
that is the difference between date part and date name. And okay, and then next very useful function is called date add. So basically what it does is it returns the date time after adding specified number to add to the date part specified of the given date. So basically it returns um, it returns like it returns the date time after adding whatever you want to add to that date. Okay?
Yeah.
So now let's see that in action. So this is the date add function, and then the syntax is you provide the date part, and then number to add, and then to which date to
Yeah.
add. Okay. Let's see that in action. So we'll say date add function. So instead of saying date name, now we will use the date add. And then we want to, for example, say we want to add 10 days to today. Okay, so we want to add days. So we'll specify day, and then we want to specify how many units we want to add. In this case, how many days we want to add. So we're trying to add 10 days to today's date. Okay. So if you do that, it basically what it does is it fetches today's date, and then it adds 10 days to the day part. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we want to see the difference, say select get date, and now if I execute this, as you can see, so today's date is June 25th, and what we are getting here is the July 5th. Okay, so if you add 10 days to this, it becomes July 5th, right? So this is what date date add function does. Okay, so now you might say, what is what is the use of this function? There are many use cases. For example, you can actually find the first day of each month in a year by using this function and combining with some other date functions. Or there might be cases that you might need to just simply add or subtract some units to any part of the date and so on. Depending on the real life scenarios, you can use this function. We'll talk about that a little later. So so that is what date add function does. And also you can actually not only add but also subtract days. So, but there is no date subtract function. You can only use the date add, but instead of saying add 10 days, you would say add minus 10 days. Okay. So now this would subtract 10 days from today's date. If today's is 25th, now it's giving you 15th, as you see here. Okay. So people get confused when there are many cases when you want to actually not add but subtract a day. In that case, people get confused because there is no such thing as date subtract. There is only one function that's called date add. So you can basically only add days or whatever part of the date, but you cannot subtract. So if you want to subtract, instead of adding positive value, you will add negative value. Okay? So this way, it will actually subtract it. Okay? Okay, and now let's move on to the next one is the date diff. This means date difference. So what it does is returns the count of the specified date part boundaries crossed between the specified start date and end date. What it does is basically you provide the date part, like it could be days, it could be years, and so on, and then you give the start date, and then you provide the end date. So it will calculate the difference between this end date and the start date. Like this is like very useful. For example, especially if you want to calculate the age of a person, for example, you could basically do date diff function, and there you could actually subtract the years from today, so that you will, for example, let's say we want to know the ages of these people, right? Let's say we want to have the name, we want to have the date of birth, and to find out the age, we can say date diff, and then date difference in, we want the age, so we want the in years, okay? And the starting point would be the date of birth, and endpoint would be get date. So from today, what is the difference between today and the date of birth in years? So if you do that, this will give you the ages. Okay? So you can say as age. So now you have this person, for example, was born in 88, so the age is 31. And this person was born in 25, so age is 94, and so on. Okay? So now what it's doing is it's basically taking the difference between this date of birth, in this case, this values, and today. So the difference between today and this in years. Okay? You can do it in, if you want to do it in month, you can do it in months. For example, instead of saying year, I could say month, and then if I execute this, you see this is how many months have these people lived.
Yeah.
Okay? You can also do it in hours or whatever unit you want. Doesn't matter. It will calculate the difference in whatever you want to calculate. Has lived. For example, okay, in this case, it's again the calculating the age, which we already did, and but what they're doing is you're using unscalar function, but we'll learn this later when we learn the functions. Okay. But yeah, this is how you calculate the age. Okay, now let's move on to next class. Now this is also one of the very useful functions in SQL Server. That is the cast function and convert functions. So we have two, cast and convert. And as the name says, they basically, what they do is they cast or convert one data type to another data type. So we have cast and convert functions, and we'll also learn when to choose one over the other. Basically, when to use cast and when to use convert, because they do the same thing, almost. Okay. So if I go here, so basically, now first thing I want to explain, even before we start, is why do we use cast or convert? So what it does is, say, for example, cast, it takes one data type and it changes the data type to another data type. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, if you have let's say in this case this date is varchar, right? I can actually convert this into date time format. I mean data type. Okay. When do we use that? We can use it, like for example, in ETL world. Now imagine you have source. This is the data that's coming from your source, right? And you want to load this to table in your destination, and your table has column date of birth column as varchar. Okay. But if you want to load this directly, it will not go through, and it will give you an error because what you are bringing is date time, and then you are trying to insert that date time into varchar column.
Yeah.
Okay. And it will give you an error. So instead of that, you will have to convert or cast that into varchar or whatever the destination column data type is. Okay. So let's see that in action. But first, let's take a look at what these functions do. So to convert one data type to another. So basically, this is saying you convert one data type to another data type. And now let's see that in action. So let's imagine now we want to insert into this table some values. Okay.
Yeah.
So our table, in this case, this personal info table, it has 3 columns. So ID, integer, name, and date of birth as date time, right?
Yeah.
So now, if in this case, let's imagine let's insert today's date to this name column, right? Let's say, so for that we'll say insert into this table, right? Values, and then for the name part, let's say I want to insert today's date, so I say get date. Okay. And then for the date of birth, I also want to put the get date. And for ID, I want to put, say, 1, 4, 5, say 6. Okay. So if I run this, it should give me an error. Well, I guess get date was converted into varchar. Now let's select everything from this table. You see, this one got converted into varchar, and the difference is it's in words. It's saying June 25 and so on. See, because now it's going as varchar. Okay. Now let's try to insert some. Let's actually, create this table one more time, and this time let's create personal info 2, and then let's say instead of varchar, I want to say n varchar 20, and also okay, let's create this now, and now we have this table that is personal info 2, So now let's try to insert into that this say, well, actually, I guess this would still accept it because it's varchar. Let's see this example. Okay. Now, if you take a look at this, okay, I'll explain it with this example itself. Say you see this is converting it into varchar, right? But I want to convert that into cascade date as varchar 20. And if I execute this, one row will be okay. It's still converting it to varchar. Now let's see. I'm trying to think of data types that wouldn't match otherwise. Let's say we have this date of birth, or actually, you know what? I can even show you this way. Let's say I want to select the cast date of birth as varchar 20. You see, and then I also want to select date of birth. See, the difference here is one is date time and the other is varchar. That's why it's showing it as March 19 with words, because now this is varchar. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is still date time column. So
Mm-hmm.
why do you use that? Because if you want to insert this value into this column, it will not accept it. Okay, like for example, let's say, so for that you have to actually convert whatever the value is coming. Okay.
Yeah.
And but for cast, so basically this is how you use the function cast. I'll put it here. So what cast does is it converts one data type to another. Okay?
Yeah.
And how you do that, you say cast and whatever the value or the column, and then you say as, and this is the new value, new data type. So basically what you're saying is convert the values in the date of birth column into varchar 20. Okay?
Yeah.
This is very useful, like especially when you're doing ETL job, like loading from one source to another destination. And if you have difference between the data types, you will have to convert or cast your columns accordingly, because otherwise it will not insert those rows into your table. Okay. But and then if you look at this, convert actually does the same thing. Okay. I can say, instead of saying cast, I can say convert. But the syntax would be a little different. In cast, we're saying cast date of birth as varchar, right? In case of convert, we first provide the new data type we want to convert into, and then what we're converting. Okay?
Yeah.
It will be the opposite. So we want to convert this date of birth into varchar 20. You see? it does the same thing. You see, it gives you the same result, but the syntax is a little different. Okay. So now then, what is the difference between cast and convert? So convert, it has little more functionality. You can actually choose the format of the date, and then there's basically you can also add the style to it. That's not that is optional, but if you want to add, you can add. So now the styles, you see here's the number. If you say 101, the style for the style you say 101, it will format it in this format. 102 is this format, and so on. Okay. And so where do you give the style? If you look at this general syntax, you say data type, length, expression, and then at the end it's the style. Now let's try one of these styles. Okay. Starting from 101. Okay. So we're saying convert to varchar, the column date of birth, and then style should be 101. So now what it does is, you see, this formats it differently.
Yeah.
So the format for this is this. Okay. And now let's try 102. And let's try 102. Now it's different format. You see?
Yeah.
So you cannot do this with the help of cast, but you can do it with convert.
Oh.
Yeah. See, and these are the formats that you can actually get: 101, 102, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So now the question is like which one to use and where to use which one, like which one to choose. I would generally suggest using the cast unless you have a specific reason to use convert, like if you need specific formats. Otherwise, just use the cast because I think the cast is faster. But as the note says, to control the formatting of the date part, date time has to be converted to varchar using the styles provided. When converting to date data type, the convert function will ignore the style parameter. Okay. When you're converting it to date, if let's say now instead of converting into varchar, let's convert into date. Okay. It's not date time, but it's going to be date. So the date means it will only bring you the date. So now it will basically ignore the style. You see, 102 was supposed to be with dots, but in this case it's with dashes. Okay. When you convert into date, it will give you the default, which is with dashes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is the difference between cast and convert, and I would suggest using the cast unless you have a specific reason to format your date type in a certain way.
Yeah, so best practice is cast. Yeah.
Yes, the best practice is using the cast. That's easy and more readable, unless if someone asks you to format in in one of these ways, like in one of these ways. Okay. Okay, and we can also see why this is useful. For example, let's say if you remember, I think it was yesterday we were trying to concatenate all this date of birth and strings. Now, if you look at this one, let's say we want to get the date of birth. So date difference, we'll take this here. And if I execute this, it gives me the ages in, I guess in what, hours? Yeah, month is, so let's say year. Okay. So now if I want to concatenate this date of birth and then let's say concatenate this and let's say or actually just let's say without the concatenation, let's say just plus. Okay. Difference plus years old as age. Now if I run this, it will give me an error because years old is of data type integer. What we're basically saying is convert this date format into integer. Okay. Since this returns an integer and I'm trying to concatenate that integer with string, which is nvarchar or varchar, it gives me an error. You cannot add string and an integer. So if I want to see that, I need to cast this whole thing. Okay. Now if I cast this whole thing as say nvarchar, okay, and let's try to run that. You see, now we get 31 years old, 94 years old, and so on. Okay. This is how you actually use the cast or convert functions. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't cast, you cannot actually concatenate two different data types. Okay. So your data types must be same in order for you to concatenate the values. In this case, it's 31, 94. These are all integers. And what we're trying to say is we're trying to concatenate the integer with string, which is years old. And that's why it was giving us an error saying that you cannot concatenate integer with string. So after we casted this whole thing, the whole integer as nvarchar, now it's the SQL Server is reading this whole thing as nvarchar, not as an integer. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why now it's able to put these two things together. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is another use case for casting. Okay, now this is a practical example. Let's say what we want to do is, now let's imagine we have this table with ID, name, emails, and registered date. Okay, and what we want to achieve from there is each date, how many people registered each date. Okay, so in order to do that, you have to cast the registration date as date so that you will see it as date, not date time. And then you just take the, you group it by, again, the registration date, and then you cast it. Okay. The reason why we're doing that is because if you see here, we have milliseconds that are very close to each other, right? In this case, 26, 24, and we have the milliseconds that are very close to each other. And we do not want to have this milliseconds as a grouping condition. So if you remove those, then you have three different dates. Then you can easily count. Okay. But if you look at here, you see it's giving you the if you group it by the registration date, it's giving one for each, even though this one, this 3 is the same date, it gives one for each because even though they're same, the seconds and milliseconds are different. Okay.
Yeah.
Why it's considering this 3 dates as different dates, because logically these are different times, even though it's the same day, it's a different time, right? With milliseconds.
Different seconds.
Yes. But then you don't want to. In that case, you wouldn't get the correct count for the day. So now you have to convert this into date so that you can see only the date part. Then if you group it by the date, then you will get this as same date. You see? In this case, it's same date, 3 counts, this date, 2 counts, this date, 1 count. But if you don't convert that into or cast that into date format data type, then you will get 1 count for each day because the SQL Server takes the milliseconds also into account.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the one of the practical scenarios in where you can use the cast or convert. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's recap and say the difference between cast and convert. So the first thing is cast is based on, again, AN SI standard, and convert is specific to SQL Server. So if probability is a concern, portability is a concern, and if you want to use the script with other database applications, use cast. So basically what it's saying is, since cast is international standard, national standard, it works with any application. Convert, it only works with SQL Server. Okay. So if you want your code script to be applied within, among many applications, then it's a good idea to use cast instead of convert. Because if you are using your script in an application that is not in SQL Server but in some other platform, then it will not. You cannot use the convert, because convert is not recognized by any other platform except for SQL Server. Okay. So the second difference is the convert provides more flexibility than cast, which we saw. You can actually style the formats after. So, for example, it's possible to control how you want date time data types to be converted using styles with the convert function that we already saw. But in general, guideline is to use the cast unless you want to take advantage of the style functionality in convert. So only advantage of the convert is the style that you can apply. But then again, the convert cannot be used across other platforms except for SQL Server. Okay. Okay. So. Okay. So does this make sense to you so far? All this date part, date add, and all this cast and convert functions?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, good. Then let's move on to next topic, which is now we will be learning the functions. Okay. There is one more thing on the store procedures. I will talk about that in later classes. But today, let's start learning the user-defined functions. Okay. Okay. So user-defined functions is basically, it's very similar to store procedures that we learned. Only there is some difference between the store procedure and the user-defined functions that we will take a look at. So the first thing is, what is user-defined function? This is what we'll learn. Type of user-defined functions and creating a scalar user-defined function, calling a scalar user-defined function, and places where we can use scalar user-defined functions, and altering and dropping user-defined function. So user-defined functions is also called as UDF. Okay.
Yeah.
So so far we have seen the system functions such as sum, all those aggregate functions. They are called system functions. Okay. But now you can also create your own function. Okay.
Yeah.
A function that does something. The first rule of a function is function must return a value. Okay.
Yeah.
If you have any function, it has to return some value back to you. Basically, what a function does is, if it's a parameterized function, it takes some value in as a parameter, and then it processes that based on the logic that is put in that function, and then it returns a value to you. Okay. And then there is three types of this UDFs, which one is the scalar functions, and the other is inline table value functions, and other is multi-statement table value functions. Today we'll take a look into this scalar functions. Okay. So as the definition says, scalar functions may or may not have parameters. Okay. So you may or you may not have a parameter. Like parameters, if you remember from the store procedures, the parameter is a value that the user provides, after which the store procedure uses. The same thing in UDF, the user-defined functions, also true. So, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a parameter, but it should always return a single, which is a scalar value. So scalar functions, they must return a single value. Okay?
Like scalar means single, yeah?
Yes. Yes. So it will always return a single value to you. Okay?
Okay.
So the returned value can be of any data type, except text, n-text, image, cursor, or some other. So now let's create our first user-defined function. Okay.
Yeah.
So as usual, just like you would create anything else in the SQL Server, you start the creating the user-defined function by saying create function. Okay. So just like you would do the same for table, you would say create table, or for store procedure, you would say create store procedure, and then for function, you would say create function, and then you give it a meaningful name. So, and the prefix is best practices. You say UDF. Like if you remember in store procedures, we say USP. Now for the functions, we say UDF. Okay. And now let's create a very simple function. Well, basically, we have this function called, say, sum, right? Let's create a function that returns the sum. We could use the system function that's sum, but I want you to see how it works, okay? And then you say as, and then you say begin, and then you say end, okay? This is the best practices. You could also do it in a different way, but this is how you should do it. And this is actually the case with the store procedures also. With store procedures also, you could say begin, end, but this is the best practice. So in this case, after actually saying create the function, you should also say returns. Okay, this is, and then you provide the data type. This is what the function should return to you. Okay, let's say like it should return some value. So this is the data type that you provide So it will return a value of this data type that you specify. Okay. Okay. Now let's do this.
Procedure.
Yeah, this is just like store procedure, but it's function. So let's say we will create the same thing here, since we have that personal info table. Let's create a function that calculates the age. Okay. So in this case, if you see, it's saying create function and calling it an age, and then there's a parameter that is the date of birth. So basically what it does is you provide the date of birth, and then this function runs, and then it uses this logic, and then it returns, you see, it says return age. Okay, it returns the age. So for that, you declare a variable called age, and that should be of type of integer, because age is an integer. You would say age is 1, 2, 5, 20, 30 years old, for example. That is an integer, right? So what they're saying is, okay, declare this variable, and then set that variable equal to this things, and then return that variable after. Okay. Basically, what's happening here is you're providing this date of birth parameter. It's taking that in here, basically, and it's setting this variable age here, and then it's processing whatever you provided. In this case, you see, it's saying it's taking the date difference in years from this date of birth that you provide, and then it's subtracting case, month, and so on. And then it's returning, after all, it's returning this age, the value of this age. Okay? Okay. Now let's see this in action. So in this case, as it says, you have to first say returns, which means it should return something, right? So that's what we'll say. But even before that, we need to provide, so this will take parameter. The parameter will be date of birth. Okay. So we'll say add date of birth parameter, and the data type for that parameter would be date. Okay. And so basically what we're saying is, okay, we will give you a date, and then you should take that date and calculate the age for us. Okay. Yeah. That's what we're saying, this function. So after doing that, you will say returns an integer, because this date of birth, the age should be of integer type, right? So that's what we say, returns an integer. And then now we're saying as begin and end. So this would be now in between this begin and end is the actual body of the function, okay? Body of the function. So this means this is actually what happens when you run this function, okay? Yeah. Okay, so what should this function do? It should take whatever we have, and it should return as age. So we want to, within this function, we want to declare another variable called, say, add age of type integer, okay? Because what we want to do is we want to feed the result of this query, okay? Result of this query into this variable, and then return that variable here, okay? Okay, so now here it has little set that age, set age equal to, say, select give a date of birth, right?
Like it doesn't show here. Yeah, no, it's showing.
Do you see it?
Yeah. Nice.
And then after that, okay, so what we're saying is we declared another variable called age because that's what we want to see, right? And then we're setting that age equal to the result of this select statement, okay? But we want to see the difference between that in, say, in years, right? So what we would say is we'll say date diff starting from today. I mean, in date difference in years, and the starting point would be this, which is the date of birth. Okay, and then until today. Okay. So, and then after this happens, I want to return the value for this variable that's called age, right? So I say return at age. Okay. So we'll return the value for that. Let's try to run this. So now we have created this function. So now what should happen is whenever we provide this value, it should take this value and put it here, just like the store procedures. Do you remember? Like when we provided a value for a parameter, it would take that value and put it whatever it's being used inside. So now what's happening is we provide this value, it's a date, it will put it here, and it will calculate the difference between today and that provided date, and then it will pass that to this age variable that we just created inside the function. So declare means basically create. For variables, you need to declare the variable. Basically, variable is placeholder. That means the variable is something that's empty, but it will take something. You can, it's basically, imagine it as a bucket. Now you have an empty bucket that's called age, right?
Yeah.
And then what we're saying here is set this age, this bucket. Set means put into this age bucket. So we're saying equal the result of this, okay? And then return the bucket to me. Okay? So after I run this thing, if I call this function and run this function with this value, it takes this value, it puts it in here, and then calculates it all here, and then puts this everything into this age bucket. And then it hands the bucket to you. Okay? So now to call a function, you just say select, and then you give provide the name of that function, and then the value that you want to pass. Okay, and pay attention. This you have to provide at least two-part name. Two-part name is this DBO dot and then the name of the function. Okay. DBO is basically default for database owner. So whenever you create a table or anything, it will get named like this. You see, all this DBO, 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 and then the table name. This is it's called schema, which is database owner. Okay. So now I can say select, and this user-defined function name, but with DBO. Okay. And now I need to provide a value Let's provide one of these values here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Since it was date format, we'll provide it like this. And so basically you can now provide any value here. Let's say not 1988, but let's provide 1990. And if you run that, it will give you the age. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what is happening here is when we created the function, we created a parameter that's called date of birth. And when we're running this function, we are providing a value to that parameter, right?
Yeah.
Just like in stored procedures, if you remember, now what's happening is it's taking this parameter value and it's putting it here, okay?
Yeah.
And then it's basically running this whole thing, okay? Well, you need to say select, for example. You see? It's running this whole thing, and then it's getting a result, which is 29, and then it's passing it to this age.
Yeah.
Age is nothing but variable that we just created. You see, when we declared that variable, we said declare, and this is a age variable, and it's type of integer. Basically, a variable is, as I just said, it's a, imagine it as a bucket. Okay, I'll just put that. This is like a bucket. Okay, when you declare this variable, it's empty, like an empty bucket. Okay. So now what happens is when you say set the value of this age, which is the bucket, equal to whatever this function returns as a result. Okay.
Yeah.
And then return the bucket with that result. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening when we provide this value, this date for this parameter, date of birth. It takes it from here and puts it here. Okay. And then it runs this whole thing. Now it has the value 29. So now what happens is this, instead of this, I can put 29. So now this age, which is the bucket, equals to 29. And then it's returning that. Okay. Now it's returning that age to me. Okay. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So basically, that's how the functions or stored procedures work. You will have some sort of logic there. It will take some sort of value from the user, and then it processes that value inside the function, and then it will return something to you. Okay. So, and then just pay attention when you're trying to run this, you have to use two-part name, not only the name of the function, but also you should say at least the schema name, which is most of the cases, which is DBO. Okay, so where do I find that function? If I refresh this, and if I go to programmability, there is folder called functions, and then there's something called scalar valued functions, and inside there we can see our function. Okay. The name of the function is dbo.udfh. Okay. So now, okay, if the function almost like say works just like stored procedure, right? So in the case of stored procedure, we're also saying create procedure, and then we were passing this logic inside that procedure, and then when we provided a value, it would run that script inside that store procedure, and then it would return something to me, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at this, function is also doing the same thing. So then, what is the difference? Why do we even need the functions if we can use the stored procedures for that, right?
Yeah.
The reason is very simple. You see, here, it's, if you even read this, it says a stored procedure also can accept date of birth and return age, but you cannot use stored procedures in a select or where clause. This is just one difference between a function and a stored procedure. There are several other ones that we'll learn those later. But the main difference is, as you see here, basically what's happening is it's stored procedure. You can only run the stored procedure by itself alone. You cannot use that in a select statement. Okay?
Yeah.
But if you look at this one, you can actually use the function in a select statement. That means you can actually calculate the age for each value. Let's see that in action. So now we have this table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's copy this here. Select all. Okay. And now let's create another stored procedure that does the same thing, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that we'll see the difference. So instead of creating the function, we'll create the stored procedure, create proc, and then we call it user stored procedure. That's called age, and then it has date of birth parameter and this, and then we remove this part as begin, and then we don't have to use this part, and we'll only use this. So it will basically select date difference, date of birth, and then end, right? Now let's create this stored procedure. Now let's run that stored procedure. For that we say execute, if you remember, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we give the name of the stored procedure. Execute this stored procedure with this value. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now if I execute that, it will also return the same thing. Okay?
Yeah.
So if I run these two things, they both return the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So the first value is coming from the function, second value is coming from the stored procedure. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what if I want to do the same thing for all of this?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So for that, I can say, let's say, select select all these column names, right? I'll remove this word. Date of birth, and then also now I have this function. I can actually call that function from the select part. You see, I'm putting that function into select part of the statement, and instead of giving a specific value, I'm giving the whole column now. Okay?
Yeah.
You see, this is the function that we're using inside this select statement. Okay?
Yeah.
And we can say as age, right? And if I run this, you see, I get the ages for all of these columns, right?
Yeah.
Now, basically, you can actually take this function and use it in any other table, whatever you want to use it, okay? Like, for example, I think we also have this table personal info too, but I don't think we have any information in that one. let's try select from. Okay, yeah, this is empty, but that's okay. What I'm trying to say is you can. So the beauty of user-defined function is you can create the function one time, like provide this logic and everything, and you can create it one time, and you can use this function against any table anywhere in this database. Okay. For example, if let's say I don't know if we have another table that has date column, customer. I guess there was this orders, right? Order number, amount. Okay, this order date. Oh, okay. This is not in a date format. So now let's create another. Or actually, we have the table created, right? This personal info 2. Let's insert some data into this personal info 2 table. Okay.
Yeah.
Insert into this table values. Let's say we have ID 1, A, and then let's say let's insert this value. So what I'm trying to show you is that once you have the function created, you can use that function against any table. Okay. That is the usefulness of a function. Can you imagine doing the same thing for everything? Instead of doing that, you can create the function one time, and then you can keep using that function for any table you want. Okay.
Yeah.
Say this 3, and then you can create any function that does anything. You can do anything with the functions as long as you know the logic. You're good. Now you see. Now we have this personal info 2 table, right?
Yeah.
Let's select all from this table. Now we have this. Okay. So now what I can do is I can basically say personal info 2, okay, and then use the same function. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, personal info 2, and then if I run this, now you see the same function is working for another table. Okay. I don't have to write this over and over again. Once I have written this one time and saved it in a function, now I can use that function, or it's called call that function for any table. You see? Yeah. And I'm using the function in the select part. You see? This is the select. I'm saying select ID, name, date of birth, and then the function with the values of the date of birth column.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can also use the same thing function in the where clause. Okay. Let's say this, and then let's say I want to see only the people who are older than say 30 years. Okay. See, now I'm using the same function in the where clause.
Yeah.
Okay. If I run this, see, it will only show me the people who are older than 30 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Or if I say younger than 30 years, it will show me the people who are younger than 30. See, 2200.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I am trying to tell you is that you can actually call the user-defined function. I'll say function in the where clause. Okay. So you can basically use the function in the where clause And you can also use the function in the select. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now the thing is, you cannot use the stored procedure in a select or in where clause. It's impossible. Okay? Now let's try doing the same thing with the stored procedure that we created here, USB age, right? Now if I want to do the same thing, instead of this, right? I will say this. So instead of the function, I'm trying to use the store procedure now. Okay? Look what happens. You see? What it's saying is USB age is not a recognized built-in function name. See? What it's saying is basically there is no function such as USB underscore age.
Yeah.
See? This means you cannot use the store procedure in the select part or the where part of the statement. Okay? So here I will say you can not use a stored procedure in select clause. Select or where clause. Okay? So this is the main difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so procedure and function. Okay? Okay. So this is the main difference. See, basically, you can use the function in the select statement or in the where clause, whereas you cannot use the store procedure in neither the select part nor the where clause.
Yeah.
Okay. And then to alter a function, we use alter function and then the function name, just like usual. If you would alter the table or to delete it, the function, you use the drop function and function name. Okay. So we can try altering the function. Okay. First, let's try altering the function. Let's say instead of create function, okay, this I'll put on create function, and
sorry, can I take a 5-minute break?
yeah, sure, of course, yeah. I'll also take a break then. All right.
Okay.
So we were saying, we're talking about the altering the function. So just like you would do with any table or any other object in the SQL Server, to alter the function, you use the alter command. So let's alter this function that we have. So instead of saying create function, we say alter function, and then we give the name of the function. Okay? And then let's alter this, and let's say this would show us now in the age in month. Okay. So instead of showing the years, it would show us in a month. And if we run this command now, the function gets altered. And then when I use that function the next time, let's take this here, and I'll say using the altered function. Okay. So now what happens is it should give us the age in months. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we select the name and so on, and then date of birth, and then if I run this, You see, it will give me the age in months.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is how you alter the function.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now to drop the function, or say to delete the function, you use the same thing, just like you would use for any other object. Instead of saying alter, you use the drop command.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you would just need the name of the function. So in this time, we will not say alter, but we say drop. And then let's check first that our function exists here in the Object Explorer. If you see dbo_udf age, and once I drop the function, and if I refresh the database, and if I go to programmability, and then if I go to functions and scalar functions, that function doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is how you drop the function.
Yeah.
Now let's create the function back, and now we have the function back. Okay, so basically now to recap functions, there is three types of functions, which are scalar value functions that would return a single value, and then there's table valued functions that would return a whole table that we'll see in the next lessons. And then there's multi-statement table valued functions. We'll also learn that in later lessons. And then the main thing about the functions is a function must always return a value. Okay. There is no function that doesn't return a value. It will always return something. And what does a function do is, if it's a parameterized function, it will take the parameter value that is provided by the user, like in this case, this value, or you can use column as a value, and then this function gets executed for each row in that column. Okay. And then function may or may not have a parameter. Okay.
Yeah.
And what functions do is they take some value, or if it's parameterized, and if it's not, then this function will, for example, in the case of get date function, right? We don't provide any value. It will just take the system date. But it will always return some value for you.
Yeah.
How does it do it? It will basically take the value, like in this case, this parameter value, and then it puts that value, basically it processes that value inside the statement, whatever logic that you have written in the function. And then it takes it into that logic or script, and it executes that script, and then it returns the value to another, say in this case, variable, and then it returns the results in that variable. See, just like I explained to you, what we are doing here is we are creating the function named UDF age, which is user-defined function age, and then we are creating a parameter. Parameter is what user passes, what the user provides. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you give the data type for that parameter. In this case, it's a date type, because we're trying to calculate the age based on the date of birth. So date of birth is usually date.
Yeah.
And then you say returns, and then the data type. So what we're trying to say is, okay, this function, when you run this function, it returns. Returns means it shows. Okay.
Yeah.
It returns an integer, because age is an integer. It can be 1 year old, 10, 30, 100, whatever, and they are all integers. So, and then we're saying this function that I'm creating should return an integer value.
Yeah.
And then I'm saying as, and then I'm saying begin, and then this is where I'm saying, okay, begin this function as this.
Yeah.
So once I begin the function, I provide the logic for that function in the body of the function. The body is between the begin and the end. Okay. The body is actually what gets executed behind the scenes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then in the body, I provide the logic. In this case, I'm creating another variable that's called age. So to create a variable, you should declare the variable so the SQL Server knows that it's a variable. So you're saying, hey, SQL Server, I am declaring a variable. Basically, you are telling the SQL Server now this thing is a variable, and then you're saying it should be a type of integer. So variable is actually, just imagine it as bucket, empty bucket, okay? So it's in professional terms, it's placeholder. Placeholder means something that's empty, but it stores some value once the code is executed. Okay. And then what I'm saying is, okay, now I have declared this variable. So this means I have this bucket now, and now I want to set the value of that variable equal to whatever this function, this script or this code returns. Okay. So, and then after that, I'm saying, okay, after this runs, return the value of that bucket, whatever inside that bucket. Because here we're saying, put the result of this into this bucket, and then return that bucket to me.
Yeah.
Okay? So what happens is, and then I'm saying end. So this is the end of the function. Okay? And then once I create this function and I provide this value, for example, in this case, we're providing this value. Okay? What happens is the SQL Server will take this value of this parameter and replaces this parameter inside here. Okay? And then executes this script with this value now. Okay? And then after that, it returns some sort of value and makes it equal to this age bucket. So basically, it returns this value and puts it inside this bucket, and then gives that bucket with the result to you. Okay, so this is how a function works. So yeah, this is the recap for scalar functions in SQL Server, and I hope it all makes sense to you.